Welcome everyone. Thank you for Tinner Hill History Remembered. We're so glad you're here. Welcome to everyone on Facebook that is watching this being live streamed. We have a number of speakers today. I want to first acknowledge a couple of Nova Parks board members that are here. Mark Chandler from the city of Fairfax and Paul Bodino from the city of Falls Church. And you're going to hear from Michaelnardolilli in just a moment, our chairman. First, I'd like to invite Reverend Lauer with Columbia Baptist Church to come forward and open us in a word of prayer. I know Columbia Baptist Church has a long history connected to Tinner Hill and abolitionist movement pre-Civil War. So, Reverend Lauer, please come up.
Thank you very much. It is an honor. I'm deeply humbled to be a part of today's event, both because of this place and because of today's date, and of course with Columbia's long historical connection with Tinner Hill, the Henderson family, the Tinner family, and all. I've been requested to offer a prayer, so I begin with these words from the Hebrew Scriptures from the prophet Jeremiah, chapter 9. Thus saith the Lord, let not the wise boast of their wisdom, or the strong boast of their strength, or the rich boast of their riches. But let those who boast boast in this, that they understand and know me, that I am the Lord, and I exercise kindness, justice, and righteousness upon the earth. For in these things I delight, declares the Lord. Let us pray. Almighty and gracious God, sovereign Lord and ruler over the affairs of humanity and its nations, the one who exercises kindness, justice, and righteousness upon the earth, we gather now in this historic and hallowed place to remember wise and courageous leaders of bygone years, to reflect on the rightness of their cause and their audacity of hope, and to renew our own commitment to the things that are right and true and best. Thank you, God, for the legacy of Tinner Hill, for the heritage of the Tinners and the Hendersons and so many others. May this site of history, healing, and hope continue to be a place for learning the stories, for appreciating the hard-fought victories, and for dedicating self and service to freedom, equality, and unity. Compel us to do right as you give us to see the right. And on this day, as we remember Dr. King, help us to rise up and live out the true meaning of our creeds. Renew our faith, so that with that faith we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. Help our elected and appointed leaders at every level. Give them discernment for decisions and motivation for action. For if their hearts are burdened with the concerns of poverty and injustice, how much more your heart, O God, is touched with the plight of your creatures and creation. Lord, I confess things down here are a mess right now. So please intervene according to your grace and goodness, and use sincere people of goodwill such as these gathered here. Bless this Tinner Hill historic site. Protect it from harm. Preserve it for generations to come, and prosper it as an instrument of inspiration. Oh God, as we each pray in our own way, this I offer in the name of Christ my Lord. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Michaelnardolilli, the chairman of Nova Parks. Michael?
Thank you, Paul, and distinguished guests. We are gathered here today to remember the extraordinary life of a great civil rights leader, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And we do so here at this site that is a reminder of the local struggle for civil rights that preceded Dr. King and that continues today in the Black Lives Matter. I don't profess to speak for Dr. King or for the brave black leaders who gathered on this spot over 100 years ago to fight an apartheid ordinance of the city of Falls Church. Other others can do so much better than I. I do note that we are here at a property of Nova Parks. My agency was actually a creation of the civil rights movement. In 1936, when the Virginia State Park System began, those parks made no accommodations for people of color. In 1948, Maceo Martin was denied entry into Stanton State Park. His lawsuit led to the establishment of Prince William Edward State Park for Negroes, but the other state parks continue to bar non-whites. Advocates of a state park system in Northern Virginia refused to accept a state park here unless the facility was open to all. In 1950, these advocates won the right to establish their own desegregated regional park system, sort of a mini state park system here in Northern Virginia, but had so many restrictions on it as to be meaningless. During subsequent sessions of the General Assembly, advocates were able to improve the legislation bit by bit. In 1954, the Supreme Court struck down the separate but equal doctrine in schools, and the state park system tried many ways to avoid desegregating the state parks. This even included leasing Seashore State Park to a private entity. Another lawsuit followed, and an injunction led to the governor to declare no new state parks, no new state parks in 1957. That dictate provided the needed impetus that led to the founding of the Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority in 1959. In 1968, what we now call Nova Parks, was building its first pool at Bull Run Regional Park in Centerville. At the same time, the public pool in Leesburg was being closed instead of opening it up to all races. Despite significant political pressure, the Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority pushed forward and opened the largest pool in Virginia that was integrated from day one. In the Ken Burns documentary, The Civil War, it was said that, quote, the Civil War was fought in 10,000 places, close quote. Similarly, the struggle for civil rights has been fought in 10,000 places, including here at Tinner Hill and in the creation of the Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Next up is Edwin Henderson. Ed is an amazing person. He's the founder of the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation, and he's a descendant of E.B. Henderson, who was right here in 1915. Ed.
Thank you. I'd like to start out by giving honor and thanks for the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a martyr for the civil rights struggle in the United States of America. We know him most for his dream, but we need to know more about how he spoke truth to power. He was demonized during his lifetime by many of the same people who praise him today, but his speeches were always centered on his Christian background and training, emphasizing love and bringing us together as a nation. Secondly, I'd like to give honor to the ancestors who met here on Tinner Hill in 1915. Joseph Tinner, Dr. E.B. Henderson, Reverend John Colbert, Reverend George Powell, Melvin Tinner, Louis Summerall, who actually died in 1918 from the flu epidemic, much like the pandemic that we're going through now. R.J. Evans, G.W. Simmons, and sometimes left out, Isaac Sutton. But also I'd like to honor longtime local civil rights activists, Reverend Wallace Costner, Viola Hudson, Lola Saunders, Nellie Henderson, and many, many more. Thank you for your service to this community and your sacrifice. On this plot of land in 1915, 9 gentlemen came together to fight an ordinance that would have made them sell their land to whites and to move to a segment of town representing 5% of the total mass that was designated for colored only. These 9 gentlemen, as well as many others in the community, said, no, we will not do that. And they fought back in the only ways that they could in 1915. And that is through writing letters, forming an organization, reaching out to W.E.B. Du Bois to form a branch here in Falls Church. The letter that came back from Mr. Du Bois, Dr. Du Bois's office was that there are no rule branches. However, we won't leave you alone. We will assist you in any ways that we can as your committee fights for your rights. They were triumphant in this endeavor, and the ordinance was never enforced because in 1917, the president of the NAACP, a white lawyer from Boston named Moorfield Story, argued before the Supreme Court, and the decision that came back was that such ordinances were unconstitutional. The first victory for the NAACP in the Supreme Court. I'd like to jump now ahead to around 1998, when in June, after the Tinner Hill Festival, which was held across the street, we met with the mayor of Falls Church, David Snyder, the supervisor for the Providence District, now Congressman Jerry Conley, and then delegate to the Virginia Assembly, Bob Hull. And we talked about securing this land for a memorial to this history. It took many years to get to where we are right now as far as putting this land aside to memorialize this history. And it's thanks to, I'd like to give thanks to County of Fairfax, the City of Falls Church, Northern Nova Parks, and who partnered with Tinner Hill to make this memorial a reality. We're not done yet. Today, as we unveil the permanent historic markers, is a step in the right direction as we move forward. Many of the things that Tinner Hill has used to tell this story has been our annual music festival, which this year is slated. We're still going to try to do it. I don't know if we're able to, but we're planning on trying to do it either in August or October. Our Social Justice Committee, which is pushing the envelope as far as social justice and is an auxiliary of the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation. And our initiative, our most recent initiative, the Tinner Hill Mural Project and Making History Visible initiative. As we look to the future, from Nat Turner to the U.S. Colored Troops, to the Colored Citizens Protective League, to the Montgomery bus boycott, to Selma, to Colin Kaepernick, and to the mass protests over the death of George Floyd. We move forward in love as we continue to fight to make our voices heard and to continue the struggle for equality and equal rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin. It's a great history and what happened here. There are few places in the United States that are represented by 2 members of Congress, but this one certainly is. We have both of them here today. So first, I'd like to invite Representative Jerry Conley to come up, and as you just heard, he played a key role in securing this property when he was with the Board of Supervisors.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Ed. Thank you to the mayor. Thank you to my colleague, Don Beyer, and his wonderful wife, Megan, over here. Thank you to Dr. Palchek, my successor as Providence Supervisor. Thank you to David Myers, who played a pivotal role in saving this property and preserving a very important piece of our history. You know, the tragic truth about American history is that it is colored by an interplay between courage and violence. We're standing at a place that exhibited both. 12 days ago, the capital of the United States was stormed by a violent mob intent on overturning a free and fair election that had been certified by every state, reviewed by 80 different judicial reviews, and certified. But that didn't stop the lie that motivated the crowd that ended up in 5 deaths, violence. On that day, we saw heroism. We saw police officers put their lives on the line to protect that sacred place and the lives in it. Don and I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for those brave police officers. And that, tragically, hasn't stopped. That crowd was filled with haters and extremists and white supremacists who were still shouting out racial epithets 106 years after Tinner Hill events began. America has to deal with extremism and racism in its midst. But the story of Tinner Hill is the story of men and women of courage. And think back to 1915. Jim Crow was everywhere. It was the law to separate the races, to denigrate those of color who could not access facilities that were readily available to the white population. Violence was occurring to enforce Jim Crow. Illegal, extrajudicial violence. Freely elected governments in the South had been overthrown by violence, installing all white, conservative, racist governments. In America, that happened. People were being lynched for expressing themselves, being themselves. It is in that environment that Joseph Tinner and his brother and others decided to take a stand right here against an ordinance that would have forcibly removed the black community from this area because the white majority had decided, we want it. You need to move. And resistance to that ordinance was putting your life on the line. And Joseph Tinner and his allies were willing to do that. And ultimately, they prevailed. And we're celebrating that kind of courage like Martin Luther King, who we also celebrate today, who also died violently. But he changed America. He changed hearts and minds. And that's what we have to believe we can do. by remembering our history, the good and the bad, and rededicating ourselves to the proposition that all men and women are created equal and deserve it, and that America must live up to its aspirations. I want to end on a maybe a more humorous note. When I was Providence Supervisor, I came to an event that Ed Henderson and crowd had organized here to celebrate the Tinner legacy. And he, being Ed Henderson, said, you, the county, need to purchase the Tinner Hill property, the home site, so we can build a civil rights museum. And I was kind of taken with the idea. And it just so happened, Dave Myers, who was the mayor of Falls Church at the time, he was there too. And I said, Dave, we ought to do that. But the problem was the line went right through this property. So the Tinner Hill site, which was residentially zoned, therefore cheaper, was in the county. And the other property, which was zoned commercial, was in the city, which meant it was like 3 times the cost of our site. So it just so happened the next day we had a board meeting, and I went to the board meeting and I said, I'd like to purchase the Joseph Tinner homestead site, and I went through the history. And the whole board, I don't know, we must have had a good lunch that day or something, and everyone went, okay. And on the spot, we authorized the purchase of the site. So I called Dave Myers instantly, and I said, okay, Don, it's your turn. And he went, what do you mean you're done? I said, we've agreed to purchase the site. Now, you promised you would purchase, of course, for the city. It was kind of expensive and a challenge. But I really enjoyed doing it. And to his credit, Dave followed through on his promise, and we're here today. At any rate, thank you so much for having me here today. Thank you for remembering our history, which we're still living through. But sooner or later, our country will deal with its history, and we will move on to the kind of promised land that Martin Luther King foresaw in his famous speech at the Lincoln Memorial. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for that reminder of your role in acquiring this property. Next up, I'd like to invite Congressman Don Beyer. We are actually in the 8th Congressional District, although very close to the 11th. And Don has deep roots here in Falls Church. Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Paul, very much. Well, first, happy Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. It would be his 92nd birthday. And I'm still just amazed that he was only 38 years old when he died. I think of all that he accomplished in such an incredibly young life. And I love to be here with my good friend and mentor and Uncle Jerry Conley. He always makes me pay 3 times as much for anything, too. And by the way, Jerry lost his mom in the last 2 days. So thank you for being with us anyway, despite the family loss. The pastor said that times are a mess right now. I think these are the most difficult times in America in my lifetime. We've not been this divided since the Civil War. 75 million Americans voted for Donald Trump. Thousands of domestic terrorists attacked the U.S. Capitol. An explosion of lies and fantasies and conspiracy theories spread all over the internet. And our division has more than one cause, but we have to be brave enough to acknowledge that the first and primary cause is our structural, systemic, and deeply seated racism. This is a racism that is obvious and apparent everywhere in our culture and in our economy. It's not new. We've accepted it and nurtured it and even fought against it for more than 400 years. But the most powerful, recent, unspeakable example of our racism is a simple idea experiment. If those who'd attacked the Capitol on January 6th, who beat up police officers, and defecated on the Senate floor and threatened to hang the vice president and assassinate the speaker, if they were black, how many would have died? So where do we go from here? Well, we do need big picture changes, the important changes in how our laws and how our economy works. We can pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We can take Lee's name off the Arlington House. We can pass my Cost of Police Misconduct Act, which will make transparent all the money our state and local governments pay to settle police misconduct cases. We can pass the No Hate Act, which will dramatically improve the recording of hate crimes, done so poorly across the country. We can fix the Voting Rights Act, led by Virginia Bobby Scott. And we can fix the pernicious chasm in family wealth between black and white families, 8 or 10 times. With baby bonds, with the $15 minimum wage, with the recognition that U.S. discriminatory housing policy created much of this inequality. We also need to do the little picture things, the way we lead our everyday lives. Make sure that our social circle includes our friends of color. Make sure our leadership at work, in the community, and in government looks like America. Joe Biden, by the way, is doing exactly that today. And do our best to recognize the subtle, structural, real, usually unintended ways race plays out in our lives. From Voltaire, who said, "All we can cultivate is our own garden." Happy Martin Luther King birthday. Thank you, Tinner Hill. Thank you, Michael and Ed, for the incredible history. And happy Martin Luther King's birthday.
Thank you, Don. That was great. Next up, I'd like to invite Karen Chamblin. She is the newly elected president of the Fairfax chapter of the NAACP. And welcome, Karen.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is such an honor to be here today to celebrate with you all in this very historic day, in this very historic moment. As you've heard, in 1915, the city of Falls Church passed Jim Crow legislation mandating residential, I think this is going to be better. Okay, mandating residential segregation by restricting African Americans to a particular area in the city of Falls Church, and also promoting segregated housing. Realizing this was such an injustice and such a violation of civil liberties, Joseph Tinner and Dr. Henderson and many members of the Black community and their allies joined a strong alliance to fight these injustices and promote the betterment for all, particularly African Americans in this community. And this strong alliance, as you heard today, resulted in the first rural branch of the NAACP. And with that same spirit, we stand here together, shoulder to shoulder, at least 6 feet apart, but shoulder to shoulder together, we stand together here today to memorialize where justice prevailed. The Fairfax County NAACP and the Tinner Hill Foundation shares a long history and long-standing and working relationship as we work together to fight injustices and to promote the cultural and significance of the African American community and its contribution to the city of Fairfax and the city of Falls Church and Fairfax County. And so I'd like to say the great words of Dr. Martin Luther King as he described the beloved community. In his great words, the beloved community is a community where equity, it's based on justice, equal opportunity, and love of one's fellow human beings. The end is reconciliation. The end is redemption. The end is the creation of the beloved community. It is this type of spirit and this type of love that can transform opponents into friends. It is this type of understanding, goodwill, that will transform the deep gloom of the old age into the exuberant gladness of the new age. It is this love which will bring about miracles in the heart of men. And so I look forward to working with each and every one as we work together to promote sustainability and to promote equal opportunity and fairness for all. Thank you.
Thank you for those inspiring words. Next, I'd like to ask Mayor David Tarver to come up, and we appreciate the City of Falls Church for helping us today.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much. As you know, this park is half in Falls Church, half in Fairfax County. I welcome you to the Falls Church half. We here in Northern Virginia have a checkered history on race and have good reason to remember Dr. King's life and legacy. This boundary was created in the 1880s after an African American man, Mr. Church, successfully ran for town council. The council then gerrymandered the town's boundaries to exclude areas where African Americans lived. This park tells the story of that division and of the white majority seeking to bar African American participation in government and our subsequent efforts to heal that division. Tinner Hill is the story of ordinary citizens, African American farmers, businessmen, educators, laborers who organized on this site in 1916 to secure their rights against the Jim Crow laws of segregation. The injustice that was fought here, the 1915 town ordinance that you heard about, sought to legislate where African Americans could and could not hold property. Of course, that struggle didn't end in 1917 when that redlining was declared unconstitutional. Nor did it end with Brown versus the Board of Education, the Montgomery bus boycott, or the March on Washington led by Dr. King. We still strive for that goal. Just this past year, millions of people across this country once again came together to protest continuing and systemic racial and social injustice. It is fitting that we gather here today, for this place is not about the past, it's about our future. It is instructive as to how we as a nation can continue to change for the better. Violence spurred by false grievance like those at the Capitol is a dead end, and the opposite of what these citizen activists did here at Tinner Hill. Dr. King and the civil rights pioneers stand in stark contrast with recent days in Washington. Dr. King appealed to this country's highest ideals, not its basest instincts. Through his rhetoric and action, he inspired us to be better. He categorically rejected violence, not incited it. He challenged us all to live up to the cherished words of the Constitution, not to trample them. Dr. King was about the power of ideas, not power. He fostered unity, not division. The civil rights movement at its core is about common decency and respect for all. What a contrast with recent days. The folks here at Tinner Hill were ordinary people doing extraordinary things. We can do that. Let us then reject those who hate, bully, lie, and divide, and recommit ourselves to justice, compassion, decency, and dignity for all. As Dr. King said, let us never, never be afraid to do what's right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Tarver. Next up, I'd like to invite Supervisor Delia Palchek to come up and welcome us to the Providence District side of Fairfax County. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I'm a bit short. Okay. Thank you and welcome. And first of all, I want to say I think Karen coined a new phrase for us today, standing here shoulder to shoulder and 6 feet apart. It is such an honor to be here and on the shoulders of these great giants. Some who are with us here today, some who are descended, like our friend Edwin, from Edwin Henderson and Joseph Tiller. You know, this has been my first year as a supervisor, having served on a school board, knowing very well that the history that we share in our books, the history that we've shared even in our street signs and in our historic markers, is not representative of this entire history that we have to acknowledge, learn from, and hopefully correct as we move forward. Just this year, we worked, Providence, as many may or may not know, came from the word the town of Providence, which is currently the site of the courthouse in Fairfax, near the city of Fairfax. And we know that the stories that have been shared there and the stories that we've learned have been focused on one side of our Civil War, and we've worked hard to correct that. Some have said that we're rewriting history, but I think as we've heard today, we want to have a full history and a full understanding, and to have the names of Joseph Tiller, of Edwin Henderson, and those who have fought for our African American community, and for immigrants like myself to have a place here in our community. As Representative Conley shared, we were appalled to see the site of our history in these past few weeks and what it represents. Many families like my own escaped, left countries, because we did not ever imagine in our own country here in the United States of America that we would see such a site. I want to talk a little bit about the artwork that we have here. I have an uncle who has passed away, is buried here, and had to escape Argentina because of such insurrections. And I think artwork can really help us understand and heal and see who we are as a community. As was shared, we are here in the line between the city of Falls Church and Fairfax County. The sculpture was created by Martha Jackson Jarvis, and it runs along the line that divides the Tinner Hill neighborhood into the Falls Church and Fairfax portions. This art piece therefore reveals part of that division that was imposed on the Black community of Falls Church in 1887 in the gerrymandering even prior to the 1915 fight to try to protect the Black community. I have a big heart and spent some time in West Africa and love to see every time I come to this community the zigzag, as she mentioned, the interpretation of the West African Adinkra symbol, Owo for Adobe. And it represents a way out of no way. I think some of you, like myself, woke up with some of the news and seeing appalling history, thinking, how do we work? How do we come out of this? How do we come out of this treacherous time? How do we understand that this is not who our community is? Here in Fairfax, we say we are one Fairfax. With Falls Church, we are one community. And I know that what we are living today is not representative of our hopes and dreams for our children and for the community as we move forward. So as we dedicate this beautiful symbol, and Edwin, I heard you, this is the beginning, it is not the end of this beautiful site. I know there's much more work ahead, but the foundation that was laid here by my predecessors who will join us today, we know is just the beginning of reconciliation as we move forward as a county, as we understand how even our boundaries were created, and what we need to do to ensure that justice, liberty, and a right for all to belong and to thrive and to lead in our community. So it is my honor to be here. So much history has happened here, and I hope that the future is even brighter than where we are today. So I hope you all are safe, standing together 6 feet apart, and I look forward to continuing to work with you in brighter times ahead. And to our beloved Martin Luther King, as we remember him today, thank you, fight for justice, because everything you do today will make a difference in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Palchek. We heard earlier from Edwin Henderson, who is a descendant of E.B. Henderson, who was here in 1915. And today we're going to hear from Rebecca Tinner Stotz, who lives right across the street, is a descendant of Joseph Tinner, and keeps a watchful eye on this site every day. So thank you so much, Rebecca.
Good afternoon. I'm so proud of our descendants. From the men and the women who fought for their rights and human dignity and continue to fight until they receive justice. Today, we the descendants continue to take up the same causes that our ancestors have already stood against and in most cases defeated. So while it is nice to remember their accomplishments, we can't forget their struggle. Is our roadmap for the same and similar battles for civil rights, equality, and human dignity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stotz. Next up is Irene Chambers, who is the current president of Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation.
Well, as a closing speaker, let me just say, I thank all the speakers before me, and I appreciate the recognition of the history that's here. And can I just say that this site is a place where hope, inspiration, and compassion and conscience play a big part. And I think the most wonderful thing about it is that both the universal things that we talk about when we talk about America being a place of inspiration for the world exists here, and that individuals matter here so much. I will try to be brief. In accepting the Nobel Prize for Peace in December of 1964, Dr. King spoke of the significance of a recently passed civil rights bill and the role that nonviolent protests had played in achieving this landmark legislation. But he cautioned and encouraged his listeners about the road to the promised land of freedom and justice in these words: "We must still face prodigious hilltops of opposition and gigantic mountains of resistance, but with patient and firm determination, we will press on until every valley of despair is exalted to new peaks of hope, until every mountain of pride and irrationality is made low by the leveling process of humility and compassion, until the rough places of injustice are transformed into a smooth plain of equality or opportunity, and until the crooked places of prejudice are transformed by the straightening process of bright-eyed wisdom." The events of recent years, and particularly the violence of January 6th, show clearly and searingly that Dr. King was right about how long, how arduous, and how perilous the journey to freedom and justice is. But this historic site provides hope and inspiration for that struggle and for its success. Over 100 years ago, 9 African American leaders of the Falls Church community, confronted with grave injustice and endangering their community, their right to choose where they lived, met to plan their resistance. They organized, they strategized, and they reached out to others. Their nonviolent effort worked. The ordinance that would have created a segregated black community was never implemented. These 9 men are heroes worth remembering. Because of what these men did, nonviolently, without storming a sacred civic structure, we have all gained immeasurably. When justice triumphs, we all triumph. And today, we acknowledge that this is a place where we can remember what is at the heart of this country, where we remind ourselves what freedom is, how important justice is, and where we renew our dedication to fighting for that cause, a promised land where justice and freedom prevail for all. Thank you.
Thank you for those inspiring remarks. And to finish this up, I'd like to ask Councilman David Snyder to come forward. You heard Jerry Conley tell the story of the Fairfax County acquisition of their inexpensive half, and now we hear the other half.
Good afternoon, everyone. My family and I worship downtown at the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church, and the senior minister and the associate minister, they are in the 50s and 60s, marched with Dr. Martin Luther King at Selma, Alabama. And I remember speaking to the senior minister and asking him, how would you characterize Dr. King? And he used one word, and that word was fearless. He was absolutely fearless. And fearless is a word that describes the folks who banded together to fight an apartheid ordinance. One of the proudest things I was ever able to do on city council was to be behind and to support a resolution repudiating that ordinance once and for all. You know, we're here because of what they did. We're also here because of what the living are doing. Ed Henderson, in particular, has an incredible ability to be inclusive without being exclusive. The ability to see a better future and the ability to make that future happen. Ed, thank you for so much of what you've done for our entire community. But I'll tell you, it's not just history with Ed. I expect tomorrow morning I'll get a call and Ed will have another idea about some things that we need to do in this community. And if I'm really smart, I'll do exactly what Ed suggests needs to be done. So I want to thank you for that. I want to thank each and every person here because you're playing a role in this history and making a future. And I so much appreciate all the work of prior members of the Fairfax County Board. Jerry Conley, it continues to be a regional leader. I want to thank Jim Moran, who was a congressman at the time. I want to thank every member of the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation and all the neighbors and everyone involved, the NAACP leadership, for making this happen, especially in the critical role was to not only to get Fairfax County and the City of Falls Church actually work together on something, but also to bring in Nova Parks. And I want to thank everyone on the board of Nova Parks, all the staffs, because none of this happened as a result of elected officials or the board. A lot of people worked really, really hard to get this done. So I want to say thank you to each and every one of those folks. I want to thank you to law enforcement here today because they, like the folks here at Tinner Hill, said, you know, we got to learn from our past and make a better future, and they're part of that as well. So let me conclude with this. There have been a lot of words today. Words are important. We know each and every day how important they are. But what's more important is deeds. And so I'll conclude by paraphrasing Abraham Lincoln at a similar ceremony when he said, the world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it will never forget what they did here. And that's, I believe, as important today as it was when Abraham Lincoln first said those words. So once again, thank you to each and every one of you.
Thank you very much. Now it's time to unveil this sign. If I could suggest, because we want to keep some distance, that maybe Rebecca Tinner Stotz and Ed Henderson, as the descendants of those over here, take each corner of this, and maybe everyone else, if you can, come behind us and be distanced. Then we can all have a little distance, and then we can do a countdown and unveil. You can grab this corner. And other people can come in behind. There you go. Looking good. All right. Folks, look at the camera over here. Let's count to 3 and unveil. 1, 2,